Thank you, everyone. This hearing of the Senate Caucus on International Narcotics Control will come to order. I'm delighted to have this panel of witnesses here from various sectors of the federal government to look at the Precursor Pipeline. Precursor chemicals are building blocks used to manufacture fentanyl and other synthetic drugs. They're difficult to regulate because they're often perfectly legal for certain uses. Chinese chemical suppliers and Mexican drug cartels exploit this situation. Rather than supplying, for instance, fentanyl directly to the U.S. as they once did, Chinese chemical companies now supply the precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels and transnational criminal organizations, specifically Jalisco New Generation and Sinaloa. The cartels then use their own chemists to manufacture the fentanyl to distribute to victims in the United States. The motive, of course, is always money. The authors of the recent Financial Action Task Force report titled "Money Laundering from Fentanyl and Synthetic Opioids" put it succinctly. Taking the profits out of synthetic opioid trafficking is one of the most effective ways to address a growing transnational crime and public health emergency. That's why I prioritize attacking the financial networks of the criminal cartels. I'm pleased by the State Department's announcement that it will appoint a synthetic drugs envoy to tackle the synthetic drugs and precursor chemical markets. But as co-chairman Grassley and I have warned in this letter, which without objection I will put into the record to Secretary Blinken, if this envoy is to be effective, he or she must target the financial networks of these illicit conglomerates. Currently, cartels and other actors easily launder funds into, through, and out of the United States. Without coordination, federal agencies won't have a true understanding of the magnitude of the money laundering problem in the United States or the ability to gauge whether our countermeasures against the cartels are effective. Senator Grassley requested to hold this hearing, and for good reason. It is past time we recognize that only through bipartisan intergovernmental cooperation can we sever the financial arteries that empower cartels and finance the precursor chemicals trade. That is why I introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to establish a cross-border financial crime center that would operationalize FATF recommendations. It would coordinate across all federal agencies, investigations, and information sharing related to financial crimes with a nexus to the U.S. border, ensure uniform training is provided to United States and, as appropriate, foreign law enforcement agencies, build the capacity of foreign law enforcement and private sector partners to combat money laundering, establish domestic public-private partnerships to help real-time sharing of money laundering trends and techniques, and strengthen international information sharing agreements, including import-export trade data. I'm pleased that Homeland Security Investigations included this center as part of its strategy for combating illicit opioids. Let's borrow from playbooks that have already achieved success. In a single day, the U.S. sanctioned more than 150 entities aiding Russia in its unprovoked war against Ukraine. Treasury briefed my staff that between January and May of 2023, only 87 targets associated with the illicit fentanyl trade were sanctioned. Sanctions hit the cartels in their funding and restrict their access to the United States. Let's apply the sanctions playbook to the U.S. overdose crisis, which caused 110,000 deaths, including 434 Rhode Islanders, in 2022. Chinese money laundering organizations use mirror payment schemes to avoid cross-border transactions and launder cartel cash right here in the United States. We need to make the geographic targeting orders permanent, extend anti-money laundering safeguards to investment advisors, and push towards a complete and timely implementation of the Corporate Transparency Act. And by the way, much appreciation to Senator Grassley for his terrific cooperation in getting that Corporate Transparency Act passed into law. Each day that we delay, fentanyl dealers launder ill-gotten gains through the U.S. financial system. Pushing countries like China and Mexico to take swift action is also key. That is why Co-Chair Grassley and I have pressed China, most recently in May, to increase information sharing on precursor chemicals, strengthen the enforcement of labeling laws, and implement and enforce Know Your Customer laws. Each of these asks is consistent with international treaties and guidance and could help reduce the flow of precursor chemicals from China to Mexico and fentanyl from Mexico into our country. In recent years, U.S. law enforcement collaboration with Mexican counterparts has declined significantly. I urge all relevant agencies to redouble their efforts to prevent transborder crime and pursue the criminal organizations' finance networks, as laid out in the U.S.-Mexico Bicentennial Framework for Security, Public Health, and Safe Communities. In closing, I'll take a moment to remember Dianne Feinstein. Senator Feinstein served as both the chair and co-chair of this caucus at different points for 13 years. The caucus accomplished much under her leadership, and she had a clear passion for reducing the number of overdose deaths in our country. We are all honored to have served with her on this caucus, and we take a moment to remember her right now. I yield to my co-chair, Senator Grassley, after which I'll introduce the witnesses, and you may then proceed with your statements.
First of all, I associate myself with your remarks in your opening statement and also with what you said about Senator Feinstein, because I had the opportunity to serve with her during that period of time. Let me approach it a little bit different than Senator Whitehouse did, because I said I agree with what he said. In the last 12 months, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported over 112,000 drug overdose deaths. This number increases each year. Now, for comparison, 5 years ago, in 2018, the CDC reported just under 70,000 drug overdose deaths. Behind those statistics are real American families coping with grief. I'm going to mention Ashley Romero's family is counted among those numbers. On the night of June 11th, 2018, Ashley took just half of what she thought was a pain pill. Ashley had gone to the hospital over 40 times for stomach pain, and she just wanted some relief. The pill contained, as you know, fentanyl. Ashley dropped to the floor. Her boyfriend carried her to her car, where first responders found her dead in the front seat. Ashley was just 32 years old and had an 8-year-old son. Ashley's son began to wonder why his mom wasn't there to tuck him in, as she did most nights. 3 days after Ashley died, while Grandpa tucked him into bed, he asked, quote, "Did my mom take a pill and die?" The fake pill that killed Ashley traced back to Bruce Holder. Bruce's fake pills killed at least 7 other people. He imported thousands of these fake pills from Mexico to Colorado. Agents from the FBI, Homeland Security, and DEA worked hard to track Bruce down. And in January 2023, Bruce received a life sentence. Today's hearing is going to explore how deadly pills end up in the hands of dealers like Bruce. Criminals in China ship precursor chemicals to cartels in Mexico, who process those chemicals into fentanyl. I look forward to discussing with this panel how Congress can help dismantle the Precursor Pipeline. Before we turn to that, I want to thank the agents for their hard work on the Bruce Holder case. Emotional cases take an emotional toll. This case highlights the value of interagency cooperation. We work better when we work together. No agency can respond to fentanyl crisis by itself. I've heard each agency talk of a, quote, whole government approach, end of quote. That approach includes Congress. I look forward to working with each of you and others that aren't here to tackle the fentanyl crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Grassley. I'm delighted to welcome our witnesses. After my introductions, you'll each have 5 minutes to testify. Your full statements will be made a matter of record, and of course, as a matter of law, you are deemed under oath when you're testifying here. Maggie Nardi is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary and Director of Global Programs and Policy in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at the State Department, where she oversees a $150 million portfolio of programs and multilateral engagement to combat corruption, cybercrime, and synthetic opioids. She has worked at the Department of State for 28 years. Our next witness is William Kimball, the Drug Enforcement Administration's Chief of Operations and Assistant Administrator for the Operations Division, where he commands DEA's global drug enforcement efforts across 241 domestic offices and 93 foreign offices in 69 countries, as well as DEA's Special Operations Division. Mr. Kimball previously served as the DEA's Deputy Chief of Domestic Operations. He has served as a law enforcement professional for over 29 years. Ricardo Mayoral is the Deputy Assistant Director for International Programs in the International Operations Division of Homeland Security Investigations. Mr. Mayoral provides oversight and management of HSI's Visa Security Program, Biometric Identification Transnational Migration Alert Program, there's a mouthful for you, huh? And transnational criminal investigative units that are deployed around the globe. He also oversees HSI's Personnel Recovery Unit, international agreement negotiations, and its engagement with the Department of State. Previously, Mr. Mayoral served as the Acting Assistant Director for Global Trade Investigations. I welcome each of you here and invite Ms. Nardi to proceed.
Chairman Whitehouse, Co-Chairman Grassley, I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss the State Department's efforts to address precursor chemicals used to illicitly produce synthetic drugs, including fentanyl. Addressing the threat of synthetic drugs is a top priority of the administration, and the State Department is focused on four main areas. One, reducing the diversion of precursors used in the illicit manufacturing of synthetic drugs, strengthening the ability of law enforcement officials to detect and interdict precursors, targeting online sales and financial flows that evolve from precursors, and expanding partnerships with private companies, which are used unwittingly as platforms for the sale and trafficking of precursors. To do this, first we have created this unique forum on the issue, the Global Coalition to Address Synthetic Drugs. The coalition currently has 123 participating countries and 11 international organizations with close to 1,500 experts who are working to ensure that synthetic drugs remain a priority for international cooperation and to provide a venue to share information and secure agreement on solutions, including on approaches to preventing the diversion of precursor chemicals. Through the work of the coalition, we're pressing for increased international cooperation on precursor chemicals to prevent their diversion to illicit supply chains. Further, we are urging more countries to implement Know Your Customer laws and regulations, to develop national action plans for drug and chemical disposal, to develop plans to provide earlier warning, faster scheduling, and other safeguards against the diversion of precursor chemicals. With Mexico, we partnered to strengthen the targeting and interdiction of synthetic drugs and their precursors. INL has increased training, technical assistance, and donations of equipment and canines to build Mexico's capacity to prevent the diversion of precursors. During the recent high-level security dialogue, the U.S. and Mexico discussed continuing progress in implementing our joint action plan on synthetic drugs and precursors, including by engaging private chemical and shipping companies, sharing information on seizures and emerging trends in chemical imports, enhancing maritime port security at Mexico's largest seaport, Manzanillo, and exploring ways to modernize and enhance security against illicit goods at ports of entry. So we look forward to building on these efforts through the North American Drug Dialogue, which we will host in November. We continue to seek productive counter-narcotics cooperation with the PRC, which in the past has been an effective partner on counter-narcotics. However, they must do more now to prevent the diversion of uncontrolled chemicals and equipment by transnational criminal organizations which is leading to the illicit production of synthetic drugs. Secretary Blinken consistently raises this issue with high-level PRC leadership, and we continue to call on the PRC to share information on global chemical flows with international law enforcement partners, to strengthen oversight to eliminate fraud in the export of chemicals and equipment at risk of being diverted for illicit use, and to establish end-user verification and know-your-customer systems to deny criminal actors access to global trade and precursors. The department continues to use accountability tools such as rewards and sanctions to disrupt the illicit fentanyl supply chain, including precursors, and to help bring transnational criminals to justice. We have designated over 130 fentanyl-related targets since 2021, which includes the October 3rd designation of 25 PRC individuals and entities and 3 Canadian individuals and entities involved in the international proliferation of illicit drugs, including fentanyl. We will continue to use all tools available with us. Globally, we are looking to expand the tools that countries can use to strengthen their response to this threat, such as the information sharing platforms available through the International Narcotics Control Board, or INCB. The INCB provides platforms for customs and other authorities to notify their international counterparts of illicit chemical exports to prevent diversion and to report interdiction of chemicals and new psychoactive substances. Finally, the U.S. is a leader in mobilizing the international community to place dangerous drugs and precursors under international control through the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Last year, at the request of the U.S., the CND voted unanimously to control 3 precursors used illicitly to manufacture fentanyl. I thank you for your attention to this important issue. We support congressional action to permanently schedule fentanyl-related substances as a class, codifying the current temporary scheduling into law. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. Director Kimball, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitehouse, Co-Chair Grassley, and distinguished members of this caucus. On behalf of the Department of Justice, and in particular, the more than 9,000 employees of the Drug Enforcement Administration, it is my honor to appear before you today. I thank the caucus for bringing attention to this important topic. Our nation is in the midst of a devastating drug poisoning and overdose epidemic that claimed the lives of more than 110,000 people this past year. An estimated 300 people die every day from drug poisoning, and countless more overdose and survive. For over 29 years, I've had the privilege of being a law enforcement professional in various capacities. With nearly 21 years as a DEA special agent, I have served in locations as diverse as Argentina and Texas. Currently, I am the Chief of Operations, overseeing all matters pertaining to the daily worldwide operations of DEA. Prior to being the Chief of Operations, I was the Deputy Chief of Domestic Operations. And I assure you that the current drug poisoning and illicit trafficking epidemic is like nothing we have ever experienced. Dangerous and highly sophisticated cartels operating in Mexico and the United States have been and continue to be the most significant source of illicit narcotics trafficked into and throughout our country. So far in 2023, DEA has seized more than 65 million fake pills and 10,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. That's approximately 300 million deadly doses of fentanyl taken off American streets. Even more concerning is now 7 out of 10 fake pills contain a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. As a country, we must do everything we can to stop this national crisis. For our part, the men and women of DEA are relentlessly focused on combating the deadly drug poisoning epidemic and on saving lives. DEA leads and coordinates the whole of government law enforcement response to defeat the 2 main Mexican drug cartels, the Sinaloa and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. A unified response led by DEA ensures that the whole of government is moving in one direction to protect the safety and health of Americans. These cartels pose the greatest criminal drug threat the United States has ever faced. These ruthless, violent criminal organizations have associates, facilitators, and brokers in all 50 states, as well as in more than 100 countries around the world. The Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels control the supply chain for illicit fentanyl. They obtain precursors from China, and these precursor chemicals are used to manufacture fentanyl and other synthetic drugs in clandestine laboratories in Mexico. The cartels then transport fentanyl in pill and powder form, along with other illicit drugs like methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine into the United States. I have seen firsthand what the Mexican cartels have done to our country. The cartels are destroying families and communities with callous indifference and greed. To defeat these two cartels and to protect our communities, DEA recently launched 3 cross-agency teams that are solely focused on defeating the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. And recently, we formed another team that's solely dedicated to removing illicit finance networks and replace the ill-gotten gains from coming to Mexico. Utilizing all the tools at their disposal, these teams are mapping, analyzing, and targeting the cartel's entire operations, including where they purchase the chemicals and precursor chemicals used to manufacture fentanyl, and we have been extremely successful in the last year. As part of this network-focused strategy, DEA announced Operation Chem Capture and Operation Killer Chemicals. These 2 operations resulted in indictments against numerous Chinese-based chemical companies and employees. These companies and employees were charged with crimes related to fentanyl and methamphetamine production, distribution of xylazine and nitazines, and sales resulting from precursor chemicals. These charges were the first against fentanyl precursor chemical companies. These employees spoke freely during negotiations about having clients in the United States and Mexico, specifically in Sinaloa, Mexico, where the Sinaloa cartel is based. These operations demonstrate the success of our network-based strategy and underscores the importance of infiltrating the supply chain. Unfortunately, these operations also showed that fentanyl precursors are easily bought online and via social media. Beyond the role of law enforcement, Congress also has an important role to play. I urge Congress to permanently schedule fentanyl-related substances. This is critical to the safety and health of Americans. Thank you for your opportunity to appear before the caucus today on this important issue, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much. And finally, Mr. Mayoral.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitehouse, Co-Chairman Grassley, and distinguished members of the caucus. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, efforts to combat the illicit trafficking of fentanyl, precursor chemicals, and the financial networks which profit from this deadly substance. Recognizing the lives lost to this epidemic, HSI developed and launched a strategy for combating illicit opioids. The strategy builds upon many of HSI's core investigative authorities and capabilities in combating transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, and focuses efforts on 4 goals which align with the National Drug Control Strategy. They are: reduce the international and domestic supply of illicit opioids, attack the enablers of illicit opioid trafficking, and conduct outreach with private industry. TCOs have evolved beyond insular entities and have partnered with competing TCOs in furtherance of their criminal activities. For example, the illicit collaboration between Chinese money laundering organizations, or MLOs, and Mexican cartels has created a complex ecosystem that is fueling money laundering and narcotics trafficking operations, specifically illicit fentanyl, into and within the United States. Chinese MLOs have developed sophisticated networks in the United States, Mexico, China, and throughout Asia to facilitate money laundering schemes. As Mexican cartels have taken over fentanyl production and operate on an industrial scale, they're obtaining precursor chemicals from China and combine these chemicals in Mexico to produce fentanyl. Mexican cartels then smuggle the fentanyl into the United States in either powder or pill form for distribution. Chinese criminal actors also facilitate the trafficking and distribution of illicit fentanyl pills by providing the Mexican cartels with the pill press equipment to make fake pills. HSI is attacking this illicit narcotic supply chain through an intelligence-based counter-narcotics operation that blends investigative and analytical techniques with interagency collaboration, industry partnerships, and computer-based tools. HSI's effort to combat TCOs and illicit fentanyl begin abroad. HSI has the largest international investigative presence within the Department of Homeland Security. This includes offices in Mexico and throughout the Asia-Pacific region, where precursor chemicals often originate. The effectiveness of our international counter-narcotics efforts is greatly enhanced by HSI's Transnational Criminal Investigative Unit Program, or TCIU. TCIUs are comprised of vetted foreign law enforcement officials and prosecutors who support some of HSI's most significant extraterritorial investigations and prosecutions targeting TCOs. Domestically, HSI's Border Enforcement Security Task Forces, or BESS, represent one of the agency's premier tools for turning border seizures into TCO toppling investigations. Best eliminate the barriers between federal and local investigations, close the gap with international partners in multinational criminal investigations, and minimizes the vulnerability in our operations that TCOs have traditionally capitalized on to exploit our nation's borders. In August 2023, HSI's counter-fentanyl operations transitioned from southern border and international search efforts to a nationwide counter-opioid initiative known as Operation Orion. Operation Orion will continue to prioritize and target dark web vendors and other cyber-enabled actors that engage in fentanyl distribution through the Internet. A key component of HSI's strategy is to attack the criminal financial networks that are the lifeblood of TCO operations. In 2023, HSI established the Cross-Border Financial Crime Center, or CBFCC, to strengthen the United States anti-money laundering framework. The CBFCC operates at a national level and convenes federal law enforcement agencies, partner nation authorities, banks and financial institutions, and financial technology companies to promote collaboration on cross-border financial crime. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of HSI and our efforts to use our unique authorities and global footprint to combat the illicit supply chain, the flow of illicit fentanyl, and the criminal financial networks. I look forward to your question.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayoral. We are going to proceed with 5-minute rounds of questioning back and forth, depending on how many senators are here from side to side. Senator Hassan from New Hampshire is here, and she has a pressing schedule, so I'm going to swap time with her. So our order will be Senator Hassan for 5 minutes, then Senator Grassley, and then myself, and then we'll go on to other senators who are here or to a second round. With that, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Senator Whitehouse, and I want to thank you and Senator Grassley for this hearing today. And Senator Grassley, I appreciate very much the terrible story, but all too familiar story that you told about your constituent, Ashley. We all have these constituent accounts of the impact of the fentanyl crisis on our constituents, and I'm grateful that you shared Ashley's. And I will also echo Senator Grassley in my thanks to all of you and the men and women you serve with for the work that you are doing to combat illicit drug trafficking and to keep our country and our people safe. Ms. Nardi, I want to start with a question to you. I was on a recent bipartisan congressional delegation trip to China where we met with a number of senior leaders. I pressed Chinese President Xi to crack down on the illicit trafficking of fentanyl precursors that are made in China and, as you have all have outlined, sold to cartels in Mexico. I know that the Ambassador Burns, has been raising it regularly with the Chinese government. President Xi indicated that he might be willing to take action on this. He said he would look into appointing senior leadership to start communication with us, and we obviously now have to hold him to this. What steps will the State Department take? Can it take to proactively engage with its Chinese counterparts to push China more to address the development and sale of fentanyl precursors? And what specific goals or benchmarks will the State Department set to track progress?
Thank you very much for that question, and I want to thank you also for the messaging that you are doing with China, as we are asking all of our allies to do as well. You may have seen Secretary Blinken should be meeting with the foreign minister very soon. This will certainly be on the agenda. We have the Global Coalition to address synthetic drug threats. We have been encouraging China to participate. While they have not yet formally joined, they have come to a number of briefings about this. They have suggested to us that they would like to participate. We have suggested perhaps maybe as observers. So we are working to get them involved in that aspect of our collaboration. We are also talking to our allies in the EU, the G7, and others to ask them when they have meetings with China to also raise this same issue. I think you have all mentioned the issues that we prioritize, which is establishing the Know Your Customer laws, strengthening the export controls, and frankly, sharing more information with us because it is opaque at this point. And those are our 3 priorities and the ones in which we will continue to press. But as I say, the dialogue is open and we will continue it. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much and look forward to continuing to work with all of you on that. To Mr. Kimball and Mr. Mayoral, in the past, China has worked with the United States to curb its production of fentanyl. So obviously, we now need, as the cartels are changing their strategies and tactics, we need China's cooperation to crack down on the precursors. Given President Xi's possible renewed interest in engaging with the U.S. to decrease the shipping of precursors to cartels and TCOs, U.S. law enforcement agencies need obviously to be ready to assist in these new efforts. So what role can U.S. law enforcement play in disrupting the Precursor Pipeline if China agrees to work with us? For instance, could U.S. law enforcement work with China to stop illegal money laundering that bankrolls the production of fentanyl precursors? And I'll start with you, Mr. Kimball, and then you, Mr. Mayoral.
The DEA recently had 2 high-level meetings with the Ministry of Public Security in China, one in Beijing and one in Washington. And during those meetings, we expressed our dedication to sharing information with them, and we ended up passing the names of several companies that we thought that were selling precursors for manufacture of fentanyl and methamphetamine. So the DEA is ready and willing at any given time to share information with them and to provide them with the intelligence that needs to stop these companies from this behavior.
Mr. Mayoral.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for your question. HSI, as a premier investigative agency, is ready. We have the largest international presence in foreign countries. We currently have a robust presence in Asia. We have our transnational criminal investigative units or vetted teams working side by side with our foreign partners. We are ready. I know the relationship with China has ebb and flows in the past. Lately, we haven't had any meaningful dialogues with our counterparts in China, but it seems that we're heading in the right direction, as you mentioned. We're ready. In the past, we successfully worked with the Ministry of Public Security of China on narcotics cases, and we hope that once the relationship gets reestablished, that we will reengage with them and continue collaborating with them.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Please reach out to us if we can assist. And I'll just note that I'll submit for the record a question about the availability of precursors and fentanyl on the dark web and the bill that Senator Cornyn and I have to make the J-Code task force permanent, something we would very much like to do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hassan. Co-Chair Grassley.
Yeah. I start with a short question to Mr. Mayoral. When Mexican officials working with the United States seize precursor chemicals, what evidence, if any, does the Mexican government give the United States showing that the seized precursor chemicals were actually destroyed?
Thank you for your question, Senator. We take corruption allegations very seriously. We work hand in hand through our TCIUs with our Mexican partners.
Do they show you the pictures, or do they show you the destruction of the precursor?
No, sir, but we do understand that they hire private companies for the destruction of the evidence that they seize.
Okay, thank you for that. Now to Mr. Kimball. The Justice Department indicted Chapitos in Southern District of California, Northern District of Illinois, District of Columbia, and the Southern District of New York. According to Justice Department, the Chapitos have the largest, most fentanyl trafficking operation in the world. The New York Times reported an interagency dispute over the Chapitos cases. So to my question then, has DEA headquarters always provided full support to the Southern District of California, Northern District of Illinois, District of Columbia on their Chapitos cases and other Sinaloa cartel-related matters?
Yes, the DEA headquarters has always provided support to those offices. The Chapitos indictment was a new tactic so we could actually demonstrate how the chemical companies in China were facilitating the movement of precursors to Mexico. It was transferred to manufactured into fentanyl by the Chapitos and brought into the United States. And that indictment encompassed that effort.
Did the DEA-led Special Operation Division hold a deconflicting meeting with the Southern District of New York, Southern District of California, and the Northern District of Illinois?
I do not know if they had held a meeting, no.
Okay. Now, Ms. Nardi, in September, I released a report on foreign operations in Mexico. The report cites embassy documents that show the State Department hired Mexican nationals to fill U.S. government contract positions. What steps does the State Department take to vet foreign nationals that it hires?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I will have to get back to you with an answer on that.
With a written answer?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. If the State Department receives information that one of its foreign nationals hires may be committing crimes, what steps does the State Department take to protect U.S. interest?
We will submit that as part of the written response.
Okay. Ms. Nardi, for you, in July, the Washington Street Journal reported, quote, "The Biden administration is discussing lifting sanctions on a Chinese police forensics institute suspected of participating in human rights abuses in a bid to secure Beijing's renewed cooperation in fighting fentanyl," end of quote. Is the administration considering lifting sanctions against China?
That is above my pay grade, but what I can tell you, it's the Institute of Forensic Science, which is attached to the Police Institute, which you are speaking of. They are two separate entities, but they are attached together, and that is the one that the PRC is asking us to lift sanctions on. There has been no action to date to do that.
Okay. If the Biden administration intends to lift sanctions against China, which you said was above your pay grade, to secure cooperation on fentanyl, would you commit to briefing members of Congress before those sanctions are lifted? Or is that something you can't answer? But I'd like to have somebody in the State Department tell me one way or the other if we can know about it.
We can certainly take that back, sir. I mean, as I mentioned, the Secretary Blinken will have a meeting with his counterpart soon. Certainly, these issues will be among those discussed. There has been some talk of finding a way to have a working group or some sort of gathering to discuss issues that need to be resolved before we can increase cooperation.
Could I ask one more question along this line? Then I'll go to you. If the Biden administration lifts sanctions on China's Police Forensic Institute as reported, could you commit to ensuring that this action will not result in enabling the Chinese police force's surveillance and abuse of ethnic minorities, which is a top priority of our government?
Again, Senator, we will include that in the written response.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very sympathetic to the importance of stopping the import of narcotics and the tools of the trade. And I can remember, Mr. Kimball, when I was in your line of work, laying out tables of drug product, firearms, and cash associated with the transactions to show how law enforcement was taking action. But no criminal enterprise can last very long if the proceeds of its criminal enterprise aren't being directed back into the enterprise. And it's been my experience that we've paid much more attention to the flow of narcotics into the United States than into the flow of revenues back into these international organizations. And I think if we're really going to try to disable them, we have to give equal measure to both sides of the criminal transaction. So thank you all for what you're doing to beef up the financial investigative side of the equation. Mr. Merrill, the new enterprise that you have set up on illicit finance, I think, has a lot of promise. There is one oddity here, however, and that is that China restricts what its citizens are allowed to take out of the country by way of capital. So, and for a whole variety of reasons, Chinese citizens may very well want to move quite a lot of money out of China and set up a base somewhere else, and lots of people want to come to America or hold property behind rule of law protections in America. So there's a very real prospect that a Chinese criminal organization involved in the precursor trade to create fentanyl in Mexico and ship it into the United States could be quite satisfied to leave that money in the United States, not actually have to bail up the cash or send the wire transfer or whatever to get the cash back to China, because they're happy to own the property in the United States. If that's the case, we need to have quite good eyes into who's behind shell corporations, because they're not going to hold it in their own names. And I would like to, along with Chair Grassley, we were the two original Judiciary Committee leads on the Corporate Transparency Act, along with Senator Graham. And it ended up coming out of banking because of a last-minute shift, but most of the work was done in judiciary. So we put a lot of work into that. And I would like to ask each of your organizations to take that point and use your participation in the interagency task force related to the Corporate Transparency Act, which is being led by Treasury, to make sure that they are doing a really robust exposition of that law, that the regulations that they're putting forward will address that problem. To each of you, let me say, do you accept that that is a real problem that ought to be addressed, and that transparency about foreign nationals owning property in the United States is an important piece of getting that right? Let me go right across the table and start with you, Ms. Nardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I mean, issues of beneficial ownership are high on our list of priorities in INL. At the State Department, we will be hosting the UN Convention Against Corruption Conference of States Parties in Atlanta in December, and beneficial ownership is one of the main topics, along with asset recovery, transparency, and accountability measures. It is something that we are raising in all multilateral fora, and it is definitely a priority for us.
Mr. Kimball, same question.
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. In all of our investigations, we're dedicated to removing illicit finance. We've discovered within the last year that the Chinese underground banking system is becoming more and more robust, and we're seeing the Chinese underground banking system utilized heavily by the Mexican drug cartels as their preferred money laundering mechanism. So we are dedicated to removing that and focusing on the Chinese money laundering group and their underground banking system.
Well, I know DOJ is very involved in this, so please take back my encouragement to DOJ to send the message to Treasury to make sure that those are very robust regulations. And finally, Mr. Marrow.
Thank you for your question, Chairman. HSI works diligently to attack the Chinese money laundering organizations that are supporting the cartels. We clearly are always willing to work with Congress on identifying additional authorities and resources to continue to attack TCOs operating within our borders and across our borders. HSI takes, very seriously, going after the proceeds, the ill-gotten gains of cartels. We like I stated in my opening remarks, created a cross-border financial crime center to specifically target all the methods that Chinese money laundering organizations are currently utilizing to launder the proceeds of the sale of narcotics. We have seen the use of underground banking systems, as you mentioned, in which the Chinese money laundering organizations have an excess of cash here in the U.S., which are then selling them on the black market to other Chinese nationals that have been restricted by the new capital flight restrictions imposed by the Chinese Communist Party. We're aware of, we have a very good understanding of what's happening, and we are going to continue to attack the weakest points of not only the supply chain that they utilize to bring the fentanyl into the U.S., but the weakest points that we can target to dismantle the money laundering organizations that are operating within our borders.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Co-Chair Grassley, I'll mention that one of the episodes in the enforcement of our bill was that the original Corporate Transparency Act proposal was on the form itself. Instead of having to fill in the information that we wanted that would identify the real beneficial owner, there was a box you could check and not disclose the information. If I remember correctly, the box just said unknown. Sort of defeats the purpose of the exercise. So luckily, Treasury's pulled back from that and has decided that's a terrible idea, I think under considerable pressure from law enforcement. So to the extent you had a hand in that, thank you for that. But the idea that a disclosure measure can be defeated by simply checking a box that says unknown shows how ineffectual enforcement and regulations can sometimes be. With that, let me turn it over to my co-chair.
I guess it proves that Congress should be more specific when we write the legislation.
And watchful when they write the regs.
Yeah. I'm going to start out with Ms. Nardi. In May, Senator Whitehouse and I wrote the Chinese embassy asking for help combating precursor chemicals. They wrote back saying, quote, "The United States only temporarily schedules fentanyl substances. If the U.S. can put those substances under permanent scheduling as soon as possible, it will be more conducive to addressing U.S. drug issues on the supply side," end of quote. How has Congress's inability to permanently schedule fentanyl knockoffs impacted China's assistance to the United States on fentanyl-related issues?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Well, I can say that they raise it at every single opportunity that we have. Whether that is, in fact, the key to making a difference, we won't know unless that happens, but it is something that they raise every single time we meet with them.
So if Congress would pass it, then we'd find, they would test them, their sincerity, like they said in their answer to Senator Whitehouse and me.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Mayoral, the New York Times reported that in May 2022, Homeland Security investigations saw an opportunity to arrest at least one of the Chepitos and wanted to take that action. Did Homeland Security see an opportunity to arrest at least one of the cartel named in May 2022?
That is correct, Co-Chairman Grassley. We had an opportunity to go after one of the Chapitos, and for reasons that you have very well documented on your board and your report and letters to the DHS Secretary, we weren't able to execute.
Okay. Former Deputy Attorney General Rosen, to you, sir. Former Deputy Attorney General Rosen issued a memo titled, quote, "Adjudication of venue disputes related to multi-district investigations and prosecutions of international narcotics trafficking," end of quote. Also, of course, this is known as a Rosen memo. It was designed to sort out agency and jurisdictional issues for international narcotics cases. Was this memo in effect May 2022?
Honestly, Co-Chairman Grassley, I'm not sure if it was effective on that, during that timeframe, but we are committed to continue to work with our partners in DEA in going after the hierarchy and the higher-ups of the Sinaloa cartel and Jalisco Nueva Generación, which are the top cartels sending fentanyl to the U.S.
Well, I think I think you gave me the best answer you can now, but I think I need an answer to know whether that memo was in effect in May 2022, and if it wasn't in effect, why it wasn't in effect. Can you answer that in writing?
We will get back to you, definitely,
Okay.
sir.
Then also to Mr. Myraw, the Chinese embassy told Senator Whitehouse and me in a letter that, quote, China is not the main source of chemicals of Mexico, end of quote, and then continuing to quote, that the amount of chemicals exported to Mexico from the U.S. far exceeds that from Mexico, end of quote. Mr. Mauro, can you shed some light on which country sends more precursor chemicals into Mexico?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Senator, I don't have the trade data in front of me, but my understanding is, and we will definitely will have to go back and check, and we'll provide a written answer for you. But my understanding has been that China is the main source of chemicals to Mexico. But again, the big caveat is I don't have the trade data in front of me, so.
Well, I appreciate your saying you will get me that information.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Also, to Mr. Kimball, last week I joined a letter to Meta, led by Senator Ernst, that flagged several Facebook posts advertising the sale of precursor chemicals online. These precursors were List 1 chemicals under the Controlled Substance Act. So to you, has the DEA had conversation with tech companies to find solutions to illegal online sales and end-to-end encryption problems?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We have had multiple periods of dialogue with the social media companies to increase their cooperation and to stop the sale and distribution of drugs along their platforms. We are generally concerned about end-to-end encryption. That is, some companies use it completely, and others we anticipate other companies using it more, and this will prevent us from gathering intelligence through court-ordered process and evidence against the trafficking of illicit substance over social media networks.
Yeah. While we're on this subject of tech companies, can you give us some ideas how they can better assist law enforcement?
They can provide more leads when they determine that people are using their platforms to distribute illicit substances. And they can also comply with court-ordered process to provide information and evidence when the court-order process is served against them in drug enforcement investigations.
Yeah. This is my last series of questions, and they're also to Mr. Kimball. I've been investigating whistleblower allegations of contract irregularities at DEA involving Administrator Milgram. Whistleblowers allege she directed the hiring of her friends and former associates, sometimes by sole source contractors awarded without competition. This includes a sole source contract to Wilmer Hale for production of a report on DEA's foreign operations. So far, the DEA has improperly cited an ongoing investigation by the Office of Inspector General to refuse answering my questions, even though the Inspector General's office had advised me that DEA can respond. So do you, considering the fact that the taxpayers paid for the Wilmer Hale report, did anyone at DEA ask for or make any substantive substantive changes to the Wilmer Hale report before it was publicly released, and if so, who and why?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I have no knowledge of anyone altering the report before it was released.
Okay. And then my last question, also to you, according to whistleblower disclosures, DEA is requiring senior agents to run their work through Mr. Jose Cordero, a former associate of the administrator who was awarded a sole source contract with DEA. When a sole source contract is awarded to a contractor, is it DEA's standard practice to require its agency employees to report to that contractor for decision-making, essentially subordinating those employees to the contractor?
Senator, thank you for your question. DEA supervisors do not report to any contractor.
Okay, thank you. I'm done, thank you.
Thanks very much. Just please make sure you're taking good notes of Senator Grassley's questions and that we get timely responses. One of the frustrations of being in our line of work is that very often people in your line of work say that you'll get back to us and then don't, so please do. A couple of things. With respect to DOJ, there's been a lot of talk in this hearing about fentanyl scheduling and making it permanent. And when we start down that path, there are very often definitional issues that come up about what is a fentanyl knockoff or what is sufficiently like or not like fentanyl so that people can know whether it's being scheduled. What is being scheduled, I should say. It is a highly technical question. Can you get me whatever DOJ's latest and greatest is on what language you would like to see in a fentanyl scheduling statute? Mr. Kimball?
Thank you for your question, sir. Yes, we can.
Great. I'd appreciate that. And I would say that cooperation amongst all of your agencies seems to be improving, and the focus on the illicit finance networks that prop up the fentanyl dealers seems to be improving. I think we still have a pretty significant gap with financial secrecy in the U.S., where you don't need to bring the money home in some instances. You buy yourself a house, you open up a big stock account, you take advantage of your ability to travel to the U.S. and basically build assets for yourself here, again, protected by U.S. rule of law, and very often secrecy interferes. And it is a recurring frustration of mine that investment houses aren't subject to the same anti-money laundering and transparency requirements as banks. And real estate is very often an easy way to hide stolen assets in the United States. So the more you can continue to press in those areas, I'm the author of the Enablers Act. I would love to see that pass into law. I'd like to make sure that your agencies are encouraging that as much as possible, continuing the geographic targeting orders on a regular basis and for a long time, I think will be a really strong signal to market, so I would encourage that as well. And I'll turn it over to Senator Lujan in 1 second, but with respect to the business of the precursor chemicals coming into Mexico from China, Mr. Kimball, you've got an enormous amount of experience. If you were giving advice to a new DEA agent going into Mexico to try to address this problem, what are the opportunities and difficulties that you'd brief them on with respect to how you track a precursor when the precursor itself is not contraband as you're trying to defeat the fentanyl trade?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question.
I think I'll go.
The trafficking of precursor chemicals is extremely difficult for all of us at the table to track and to deal with. Precursor chemicals come in a lot of different shapes, forms, and substances, and nowadays the chemical companies in China are selling them in a manner where it's very easy to mix them to produce fentanyl. we really look at the way that illicit finance is used to purchase chemicals, that's a very good pointer system to actually what companies are selling precursor chemicals. So we're starting off with known Mexican cartel members. From
That's an
Sinaloa.
important clue.
Yes.
If there's a legitimate transaction that buys the precursor chemical, it's a signal that its use is likely to be legitimate, where if it's illicit funding, that's a pretty good sign its use is likely to be illicit.
Yes, sir. So we start off looking at the known target from the Sinaloa or CJ&G cartel, and then we follow their financial transactions to the chemical companies in China, and that's the first step we look at when we're looking at packages coming back and forth from China.
Let me turn it over to Senator Lujan, who has a state that is vitally interested in this question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your line of questioning as well, and thank you and the ranking member for this important hearing. I want to thank our panels and our experts for being here, as well as all of the supporting teams that are with you as well. Earlier this month, the Justice Department unsealed 8 indictments charging China-based companies and their employees with crimes relating to fentanyl, with methamphetamine production, distribution of synthetic opioids, and sales resulting from precursor chemicals. While I applaud the work of law enforcement in this case, we know that this is just a drop in the bucket. And if we shut down one organization in America, another one pops up to fill the vacuum. The United States has to do a better job to prevent these transnational criminal organizations from using legitimate channels of commerce to transport their products and launder their profits. These are businesses. They're making money. Money's moving, not just to buy chemicals, but once they sell product, that money doesn't just disappear. It goes to the bad folks that are moving the product. Mr. Kimball and Mr. Mayoral, what is the DEA and HSI doing to cut off the TCOs from using our banking system and our supply chains?
Sir, within the last year, we focused a large part of our investigative effort into identifying the whole supply chain of fentanyl, from the Chinese companies that are supplying precursors to the Mexican drug cartels that are manufacturing it, and then how the companies or how money launderers are getting money back into Mexico. We're using our Attorney General exempted accounts as a pointer system. We're actually laundering money through our accounts, and we use that as a pointer system to find other money laundering groups that are also working for the cartels. It's been very successful in identifying new networks and new players and new businesses that are using that are moving drug money for the cartels.
Senator Lujan, thank you for your question. HSI, as a premier law enforcement agency, worked recently to create our cross-border financial crime center, which will bring a whole government approach, and we will be partnering with other federal law enforcement agencies, state, tribal, and local, and also with the private sector, the financial sector, specifically in the financial technology sectors, to not only work together to attack the transnational criminal organizations, and more specifically the Chinese money laundering organizations that are being used by the Mexican cartels to launder their ill-gotten gains. We will work, among other things, to build capacity at the local and state and tribal level to provide those agents in the field with the understanding and the tools to work complex money laundering investigations. We will also conduct, and we're currently doing this, conduct a proactive outreach to the financial sector and financial technology sectors to let them know what the new trends that we're seeing in regards to money laundering, so they can build more resilient anti-money laundering efforts. It's a whole government approach. Obviously, we have to partner up with the private sector, and capacity building is one of the main pillars of the creation of our center. Thank you.
Has anyone gone to jail for laundering money with the cartels in the last year in the United States?
Yes.
Yes.
Have any financial institution lost their charter for getting caught laundering money with the cartels in the United States in the last year?
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I can't recall any recently.
I'm not aware either. The process in the United States, Mr. Chairman, is one that needs attention in this specific area. It's my understanding that when a financial institution is caught laundering money, there's an agreement with the Treasury Department that that financial institution gets to hire someone with the approval of the Treasury. I mean, give me this deal every day. And then that person gets to come up with some corrective plan for that financial institution. Look, I grew up near a dairy going home. They made money selling milk. The more milk they could sell, the better off the family did. If my cost of doing business says you're going to slap me with a $50 million fine, but I can make $100 million off the deal, I'll take the deal. Because it seems like that's what they're doing today. And I'm very concerned that in this specific area, the rules governing how enforcement actions are being carried when it comes to the money transactions, which to me, that's what this is all about, needs help and support. And I hope that through all of your expertise and the work that you do and the investigations that you conduct and how thorough they are, I remain frustrated that no charters are lost and the people that are laundering the money themselves, they don't go to jail. If you're rich enough in America, you can do whatever you want. You don't go to jail. And that's what concerns me in this space, where we all have friends, constituents, families, or loved ones from ourselves that are dying from all this stuff. But the folks making money off of it seem to be doing all right. And it frustrates me, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate this hearing very much. I look forward to learning more from you all and doing my part to carry initiatives, legislation, ask questions, so that the entities responsible for going after that side of this business, that you have the tools you need if they're not going to do it themselves. And so thank you for the work that you do and the commitment that you made to the United States of America. And Mr. Chairman, the work that you're doing, you know better than most. You have a stellar record when it comes to standing up for people and for justice. And I'm grateful that you're here, sir, as the chair of this committee with our ranking member and all the staff that you all do. But I certainly hope that this is a place that we can find agreement and we can dig in more. I have other questions. I'll submit them into the record. Thank you for letting me go over my time.
Thanks very much, Senator Lujan. We're going to wrap up the hearing here. Let me thank each of you for participating today, and thank you and the people you work with for the work they do to try to defend us in the fentanyl crisis. The way this is going to work is that I will say that committee members who have a question for the record that they'd like to submit should send it in by close of business Friday, so we can forward them to you as they come in. Questions that have been put on the record, particularly those by Chairman Grassley during your conversation, you're responsible for answering. Whether or not they choose to put that into a QFR, I'll leave that to Senator Grassley's staff, whether they care to supplement or not. But the ones that are on the record, I want to make sure that you answer. And I'd like to, if it works for all of you, try to shoot for a 2-week turnaround on the answers. May not be possible, I understand bureaucracy, but that would be the target. And we'll start following up after that if we haven't got the answers back. So I hope that that is achievable. And again, thank you all for the work that you're doing. I think the more that we can tear down the illicit finance operation that supports the criminal fentanyl enterprise, the more we can also degrade other criminal narcotics enterprise. And frankly, the more we end up degrading the kleptocrats and the autocrats and international criminality around the world. A whole set of bad behavior, dark industries, evil governance is propped up by the ability to hide money, particularly behind the protections of rule of law countries. And we have to do a better job in the rule of law countries of rooting it out. So again, thank you for your help in this effort. And with that, the hearing is concluded.